Good morning, everyone. Hello, a welcome to those of you joining us here in Studio A at the DMC headquarters in Salt Lake City, and to the many of you joining us for this special webinar, the latest installment in the Connect and Learn series, a chance for us to come together as employees, to meet people, to learn, to connect, and to have conversations that will help us be better people, better employees, and better parts of the DMC mission. Before we get started today, I wanted to go over a little bit of our program. I wanted to thank those who are making this program possible, both with the webinar and here in studio, our many friends, and those who are helping us with questions and helping us to prepare for the message that we'll receive from Ambassador Gable. In the next few minutes, we're going to hear from our CEO, Keith McMullen. He will say a few words to us, and then we will have the chance to listen to Ambassador Gable, whom I will introduce. But we want the feeling of this meeting to be one of exchange. Ambassador Gable is a person who loves dialogue, she loves conversation, and that's what she brings to the table and what you bring to everyone we serve. Today, we'd ask everyone in the studio audience to make sure that their phones are silent. Those of you who are joining us from the webinar, please email me, asherinian@deseretmgt.com. If you've got a question for Ambassador Gable, I'm going to pose it to her from this stage, and we're going to keep the conversation live and make it yours. Right now, allow me to introduce our CEO, Bishop Keith McMullen, who will say a few words to us.
Thank you, Aaron. We are pleased to welcome Ambassador Gable to be with us today. She comes with a rich background that will enrich ours, for which we are grateful. As I looked at your vita and the many things that you have done, Ambassador Gable, I thought of our circumstances. I was especially drawn to the title of your book, Turnaround, and the instruction that you have shared with so many and so generously over the years. If ever there was a group of people involved in turning around, you are with them today. In this media business, we turn around almost every day to face new challenges and new opportunities. So we are grateful that you are with us, and to those of the DMC employees gathered here in the studio and virtually, we are grateful that you come together with us today. This is an opportunity to extend not only our vision, but our capabilities as we go forward. So I turn back to you, Aaron, and let you introduce our guest, please.
Thank you, sir. What an exciting moment to have someone with us who is an expert in the government, nonprofit, corporate, and purpose sectors. Ambassador Lisa Gable has pretty much done it all, whether it means representing the U.S. government, by the way, under multiple White Houses of multiple administrations, in places including Asia, and on issues from governors' offices to working and advising presidents and administrations in the most important times in our history. Ambassador Gable understands what it means to manage change for a cause. Ambassador Gable began her career, including in places like the Office of Presidential Personnel. She has been inside of Intel, inside of PepsiCo, not only advising the CEOs, but working hand to hand with the members of those companies as they built their brands and as they changed their companies. Ambassador Gable is a person who understands causes. She's raised millions of dollars for causes that are important to her heart and for the values and that support the mission that her family's been a part of. You all have her to the meeting, but we ask each of you, as you listen to her, to find that we've got someone who understands the topics of mentorship and leadership. That's something that we need a lot more of today, and it's why we're grateful that Ambassador Lisa Gable is with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Well, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be with you all and also to share with you today. I learned the art of value-based leadership from my father. My father was the founding president and co-founder of Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia. He retired in 1996. And so I grew up in an environment that was very similar to yours. What my father taught me is to show up when you say you're going to show up, no matter how hard it is. And you do what you say you're going to do, no matter how tired you are. But most importantly, he taught me to never give up. And let me tell you how important that was, because early and often, I was the odd girl out, literally. Here you see me at the U.S. Army War College. I'm 28 years old. I was used to being in a room filled with admirals and generals, and I had to learn how to hold my own. And I learned to have enough faith in myself, as taught to me by my family, in order to be able to have a voice in the room. So let me tell you a story. When I was 21, 7 years before this picture, so you can imagine how I looked, I was the youngest appointee at the Pentagon during the Cold War under Ronald Reagan. Not surprisingly, my nickname became Tinkerbell. But I embraced it because my fairy dust was data and determination. And what I learned to do is do my homework in advance. It's a key part of leadership. I would study the issues before we walked into any room. I would dig into what the underlying cause of the problem was we were there to discuss. And I would use research and data as my secret weapon. But most importantly, what I learned how to do is own the elephant in the room. Because until you are brave enough, until you have enough self-confidence to address the elephant in the room, you're never going to solve the reason for the problem that you're there to solve that day. But most importantly, I learned to be agile, planful. I learned to embrace my inner unicorn. When we look at today post-COVID, I think we can all agree that the world didn't reset the way that we thought it would. We have anxiety, we have geopolitical unrest, we have war going on in Ukraine. Yet at the same time, we have groundbreaking changes in biopharma. We have competitive space transportation, and we actually have people out there investing in colonizing Mars. Although our companies are going through a lot of changes right now where we're trying to figure out what to do, we're having to look at shorter timelines for our strategic vision. What we know is that we can still move forward despite ambiguity. And that's what we need to do. And again, we need to embrace our inner unicorn. But it's not always easy getting everybody on board with where you want to go. You're not always going to find the opportunity to move forward with people that think like you do. And in fact, in the most difficult of times is when you need to build alliances with people that may have a counter-opposite view with yours. This is a big story. It's called Getting to the Big Idea Can Be Painful. And let me tell you, getting to the big idea can be very, very painful. Imagine this. You're in a train, not the nice train with the club seats. You're in a regional train. It's hot, cracked seats, horrible bathrooms, all to get yourself to a college town in a taxi, to go to a conference room and sit for hours while the leading public health officials are arguing with the leading members of the food and beverage industry about how to make America healthier. When I took on a task that Ingenuity, the former CEO of PepsiCo, and 15 of her peers asked me to take on, they said, Lisa, we need you to unstick an initiative that's mired in acrimony. Dumb as I am, I said, sign me up. I just love situations like that. The problem that we had is that obesity was climbing to new heights. The regulators, the public health officials, they were looking to place the blame squarely on the shoulders of the food and beverage companies, accusing them of peddling sugar and fat to a population that apparently loved to eat. The companies sent their most adept decision makers, their smartest people. They knew that they had to fix their image in the mind of the consumer. And at the same time, they had to work with a group of people who did not like them very much to identify a path forward to support America's youth. The arguments went on for months. I took more migraine medicine than you can possibly imagine. And finally, the CEO of McCormick, the spice company, stepped in and goes, okay, we need to shift things. He goes, Lisa, I'm going to offer up to you the use of our Idea Lab. That's where we bring our clients that are figuring out how to introduce new products. So I packed up the carnival, and it was a carnival, and I moved it down the Northeast corridor to Baltimore, Maryland. And therein, I sat for hours with facilitators, people trained at places like McKinsey, really smart people. And we had to figure out how we were going to get this group of people to come together on an agreement on how to move forward. People that had never agreed in the past, people that actually, again, didn't like each other very much. And we had a meeting. It was a 2-day meeting. We had all this big white papers all over the wall, you're pasting everything. And we were having a difficult time coming up with a solution. But in the corner, the chief scientific officer of the Campbell Soup Company was conversing madly with a renowned epidemiologist. And all of a sudden, these two women jumped up and they said, "We have it. It's all about calories." Now, in retrospect, we all thought, well, we should have assumed that, but we didn't. We had been so far in the weeds looking at how people make bread, how they made soup, how they made ice cream, how they made cereal. And we'd worked so hard at trying to move this piece and tweak that, and we couldn't come up with a solution. And all of a sudden, in this moment of clarity, they found a common denominator that all of us could rally around: calories. So the 16 companies that I worked for, who made 35% of the food sold in America, we went to Michelle Obama and we said, we will reduce 1.5 trillion calories in the American marketplace over 5 years. And that was the spark we needed to move forward. When John F. Kennedy came forward, he was facing a similar problem. He was facing a problem similar to what we were facing today. He had a nation that was operating in a crisis of confidence. The Russians had just launched Sputnik. Yuri Gagarin, a Russian cosmonaut, had circled the Earth. And the United States was at risk for losing the technological dominance that would allow us to continue to bring forward the free world. And so Kennedy knew he had to think big. He needed to marshal the support, both material and emotional, of the American people, as well as the scientific community. He needed for America to do something that no one had ever done before. And as a result of his vision, we had a man walk on the moon, and we regained our technological superiority. I don't normally use Bible verses, but I thought it was okay in this audience. Where there is no vision, people will perish. To get to an idea, you still need to know where you're going. Unfortunately, we spend, as we did with the food and beverage companies, a lot of time tweaking, poking around the edges. We keep thinking that tactical solutions will bring us big picture types of results. They never do. But there are a couple of tricks that I've learned in each one of the programs that I've run. And these are applicable to anybody. It's not that you don't have to be a leader of the free world like John F. Kennedy was. You don't even have to be Andrew Newey, the CEO of a Fortune 50 company. But instead, what you have to do is identify those aspects of leadership that you're going to personally internalize to move everybody forward together. So first and foremost, you're going to catch your opponent doing something right. In fact, you're going to applaud them publicly. Because we as parents know that sticks sometimes work, but positive reinforcement goes a heck of a long ways when people are disgruntled, when they're unhappy. The second thing that you're going to do is you're going to take into consideration that not one solution is going to solve the problem for everybody. Your customers, your employees, or in my world, a patient advocacy, a patient, everybody comes to a situation with their own framework. Maybe their socioeconomic background, perhaps their religious upbringing, their individual tastes. They like something, they don't like something. And so if you're going through mergers and acquisitions, or if you're bringing new employees in, or if you're setting up a new partnership, you have to take into consideration their point of view, what makes them motivated, and understand that you may not be able to come up with a solution that works for all of them, but if you loosen up on the how-tos, then you're going to be able to keep people moving forward towards a vision. And that's what we did with the calorie commitment, is we made a decision that we would focus on calories. And what that did is it allowed every company to make changes to their product portfolio in a way that worked for their consumer and that worked for their market. I love focusing on complex problems. If you read my book, what you'll find out is that some way, shape, or form, I have always signed up for jobs that everybody else has failed at. Call me crazy. There have been a lot of points where I've sat on the floor of my bedroom crying before I had to leave for work, thinking, why in the world did I sign up for another one? But I learned how to solve these problems when I was at Intel Corporation. My mentor, Craig Barrett, was senior vice president of Intel when he hired me, a 25-year-old, out of the White House to come work for him as his troubleshooter, as his technical assistant. Craig would later become the CEO and chairman of the board of Intel. And what Craig taught me is how to apply manufacturing principles to solving complex situations in government, business, and philanthropy. He taught me to look at process control, just-in-time manufacturing principles, customer support. He used to have me call the Intel 1-800 number and pretend I was a customer over and over again to see how people responded to me, to try and figure out what the problems were. He taught me to benchmark against best-of-class organizations. He sent me all over the world. I got to go to Lego, and I got to go to British Airways and Louis Vuitton to understand how those brands manage their brands, how they set up the infrastructure to protect their trademarks. But most importantly, what Craig taught me is to focus relentlessly on finding the underlying cause. Every job I have ever been brought into, I was the Hail Mary pass. A CEO, a billionaire philanthropist, even the President of the United States would ask me to come in because they tried the same tried and true methodologies and nothing had worked. And so what Craig taught me to do is dig and dig and dig and dig and dig. And what I discovered is that the underlying cause is never what anybody thought that it was, because he taught me to flip the equation on top of its head. He taught me to look at it differently. When the food and beverage companies came together, as I said, we made a commitment to reduce 1.5 trillion calories from the American diet in 5 years. Because of competition, because a group of companies, Pepsi against Coke, Kellogg against General Mills, made a decision to compete on health and wellness, made a decision to compete on calories, we beat our goal by 400% 3 years in advance. We actually reduced 6.4 trillion calories from the American diet. 99% of food sold during that time period was driven by lower calorie products. We worked with the public health community on focusing on the positives, not the negatives. And they were by no means holding hands and singing Kumbaya with each other. But what we were doing instead is that we made a decision to frame our path forward within their vernacular. We said we would talk about health and wellness as a competitive value. And public health saw us embracing that, right? We had products that were being sold that were lower calorie products. Ours was the first step in to what has resulted in now a 13-year relationship of these same people, those people that made me take all that migraine medicine because they were all yelling at each other. They weren't always very nice about things. They are now friends. They are now colleagues. They're working on things that we call food as medicine, diet-related disease, making America healthier by changing the recipes of our favorite foods. They are working together at Google Food Labs, the Milken Institute, the White House Conference on Food, Nutrition, and Health, because they found a path forward together. But I'm going to tell you a different story, because sometimes it helps to see how these different techniques work in different atmospheres. And this one I call the $10 tuna fish sandwich. How would you like to take over a job where your predecessor had been indicted, they put their family on the payroll, they'd abused federal government resources, and the FBI had actually just investigated them, and no one told you when you took the job? Well, I did that when I agreed to be the U.S. ambassador to the World Expo in Aichi, Japan. President Bush, not knowing the history of the event, had made a commitment to Prime Minister Koizumi that the United States would show up at this event. The primary funding agency for the event, another little thing that no one told me, had defunded the effort completely. We had to run a full U.S. operation using 0 U.S. government resources, even though I was technically at the State Department. What I didn't even know is that no one was going to pay me for this wonderful effort, and in fact, it would cost me a lot of money. So I want you to imagine this first week on the job. I took my oath of office at Kinko's. No one at the State Department, for some reason, could think of how I was going to get sworn in time to do a press conference with Colin Powell and the ambassador of Japan, as well as Dr. Toyota, the chairman of the board of Toyota Corporation, to sign a bilateral agreement. So I called around, found out they're notaries at Kinko's. Who knew? I didn't know. So I ran over to Kinko's and I said, are you a notary? She goes, yes, ma'am, I am. I said, great. I need to take an oath of office. She goes, you do? What's it for? And so I told her. She runs back into her office and she gets a little American flag and she puts it on a cup. And all of a sudden, all the people that are at the Kinko's are going, what's going on? They're at their copying machines, they're getting their materials. And so everybody came together and they all stood around me in Kinko's, and I, so solemnly swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States, so help me God. And they're all clapping and it was wonderful. And then 5 hours later, I'm on stage with Colin Powell on CNN. So the next day, I get in a cab, and my husband is driving me to Dulles Airport because I'm going to Japan for 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And I'm going to sign the second half of a bilateral agreement. I am literally driving right up to the departure area to get my bag out of the car, and I get a phone call from the State Department attorneys. Hi, Lisa. This is so-and-so from the State Department. I'm like, hey, how are you? Did you see our event last night? Wasn't it awesome? I had so much fun. Did you have fun? Yes, but we need to tell you something. Unfortunately, due to the cost overruns and the past legal issues of your predecessor, we haven't figured out a way to pay for your plane ticket to Japan or the time that you're there. And I said, oh, you mean when I'm signing the other half of the bilateral agreement? They go, yeah, we can't figure out how to pay for it. So I hung up the phone and I looked at my husband. He goes, well, there's nothing we can do about it. You can't embarrass the President of the United States. You were just on television with Colin Powell. You got to go, so we'll pay for it. So I fly to Japan. We sign the agreement. And I find $10 tuna fish sandwiches on the Ginza in Tokyo. And I sat there eating my $10 tuna fish sandwich every single night. Anybody that's been to Japan, I'll tell you where it is because it's hard to find inexpensive food there. And the rest of the delegations were off at these fine dining restaurants. They were drinking the most expensive of whiskeys. But I knew that I had to figure out how to solve my problem very quickly. I knew that I had to rank and rate all of our activities, evaluate what it was that we really had to do in order to maintain not only the credibility of myself in the U.S. Pavilion and the President of the United States, but also, most importantly, to make sure that the American taxpayer got benefits for their dollars. So we made a decision. We were going to deliver on American jobs. So we didn't go for the fanciest pavilion. Instead, we spent 6 months putting together an ecosystem of governors, companies, Toyota, car manufacturers, travel and tourism. And we signed agreements every single day for 6 months, driving billions of dollars in foreign direct investment into the United States, signing manufacturing agreements, delivering jobs to Americans. And then there was this party, it's called your National Day, and everybody had to do one, and so everyone else was doing these lovely black tie events. Well, I couldn't afford that. So instead, I found out that someone was willing to fly in Tommy Lasorda, and we said, okay, great, we're going to have our entire event around something that the Japanese love as much as Americans love, baseball. So where the other events were very, aimed at the ambassadors and their families, I invited everybody. I had everybody from the pavilions with their grandchildren, their children. We were eating hot dogs. We were eating peanuts. We were talking about baseball, and ours truly was the most popular event. But it wasn't the novelty of the frugality of the party that set us apart. It was the fact that we had assessed our assets, we'd done our benchmarking, and we figured out how to deliver in our vision in a way that met every desired outcome of this event. We figured out what went wrong in the past, and we developed a plan on how we were going to change it. But one of the things that I realized in all of these processes, and especially with the World's Fair, is that ultimately everything you do comes down to one thing and one thing only, and it has throughout history, and that's people. People cause the problems, and somebody has to fix the problems. And it doesn't matter what technology you have, it ultimately comes down as someone operating from a standpoint they recognize that they're a steward of the institution they serve, and the institution is not there to serve them. So you're going through a lot of changes, and sometimes you're going to find people who don't accept the new vision that you've outlined. And what's worse is they complain a lot about it. I call those the bad apples. But the worst is the people who are so burnt out that they have an attitude that's just negative, and it sort of seeps through the entire organization. And I call those the bad bananas. I don't know if you realize it, but when you have apples in a bowl, they infect each other. If you put go do it at home tonight, if you have a bad banana in your bedroom, the fruit bowl in the kitchen still manages to get damaged. It's the interesting thing about bananas. So you got to deal with the bananas. The apples are a little easier to deal with. But here's the other problem. You have your bosses, they're struggling. And so what do? They go and they run after the new shiny penny. Oh, let's go try this. Oh, let's go try that. Oh, we've brought in this new person. They're amazing. They're going to change the world for us. Well, they don't. And ultimately, your test of leadership, what I learned from my dad about the value of leadership, is having empathy, generosity, humanity for the people that you're going to have stay on your team. What you're going to focus on doing is helping to bridge gaps in their portfolio of activity to make sure that you see them as problem solvers that can move forward. That's your job as a leader. Your job is to step in, move the boulder out of the way, brush them off, set them back up again, send them out. And what's going to happen is that when the rest of the team sees you treating people with dignity, humility, respect, and graciousness, that's going to be what changes the culture to move it forward. So let's review one thing. In all situations, you need accurate data to make your decisions. Data to show you what's gone wrong in the past, and data to show how you're going to move forward in the future. You're also going to set big goals. And I know that's easier when you're talking about eliminating 6.4 trillion calories from the American diet, or Elon Musk is out there colonizing Mars. But the most important thing is that you're going to energize and inspire those that you work with. Again, your employees, your customers, your partners, the general public that's observing what you're doing. You're going to speak with passion. You're going to have big ideas that you translate to them in a manner that shows that you are there to help them meet their goals. That's how you build the big team. So here are some steps that I outline in my book. First and foremost, start without assumptions. It's one of the biggest problems that we have as humans, is we assume we know why someone acts the way that they're acting. We assume that we understand why they're behaving the way they're behaving. But the reality is, to get to the underlying cause of the disease, the thing that's causing problems in your organization, is that you have to put all your assumptions to the side. You have to assume it's a blank slate. And what you're going to do is you're going to involve yourself in what I call shuttle diplomacy. One reason I'm always exhausted at the end of a turnaround is that I fly and I sit at every single person's desk who I think may be concerned about what I'm doing, who I hear is disgruntled, who I hear may be having a problem. And I have them tell me what their number one pain point is. Tell me what's causing you the greatest pain. And then I listen to them. And I keep track of that. In fact, it's something I communicate back to them later on, that I heard what they said. And what I do is I create a vision that delivers on what it is that's the most important thing. For the World's Fair, it was delivering on jobs. For Healthy Weight Commitment Foundation, for the food and beverage companies, it was the reduction of calories. But I make sure that we incorporate solving people's pain points into every single solution. And if I can't do it, then I sit down with them and I explain very firmly, full transparency, put my cards on the table, tell them financially why I can't do what they want to have done, how far I can move with the solution that I have, and are they willing to accept and stay with me on the journey that we are on. But they usually respect that because I've kept my commitment to them, right? I told them I'd come back. I told them I'd let them know what was going on. When we were getting ready to announce our results on the calorie reduction, we called the public health officials before every single announcement. Before we announced what commitment we were going to making, we pulled together a phone call 1 hour before the announcement with the press and public health leaders that despised the food companies. You know, those people that pop up in every single article saying something nasty about what you've done. And we did that continuously throughout the entire process. We would never do an announcement so that they were caught unawares. Did the same thing when I was forming a patient advocacy organization. Is all those people that were unhappy, all the apples, the bananas, and shiny pennies, we get them on the telephone, we tell them about an announcement, and by giving people the courtesy and keeping the commitment that you would keep them engaged, you would always be honest with them, that allowed us to move forward. Because most importantly, and this is something else I learned from my dad, don't treat every step like a battle. He used to tell that to my sister and I all the time. Because apparently we did treat every situation like a battle, but we grew out of it, thank God. When my father died in 2019, it was unexpected. He'd had a lot of heart problems, and he died in his sleep. A few weeks before he died, when he had retired from Liberty after 30 years in 1996, he stepped away. He believed very strongly that when a leader leaves an organization, they need to completely clear the environment so that new people can move forward. So he actually never went back on campus for 20 years. 20 years. But for some reason, he got a phone call and they said, would you deliver the charge, the last speech on behalf of those who are graduating? And my dad went back to Liberty and he stood on stage. And if you want to get me crying, you just have to show me this video. And he talked about the years before when he'd first stood on stage with 150 people. And then he pointed out that one of them was the janitor and one was the bus driver. And that instead he was standing in the stadium looking at thousands of people. I think their stadium seats 40,000 people or whatever. Thousands of people, both on the ground and in the stadium. And how different it was. And then he went to sleep, and I always thought God gave him that last opportunity to see all that he'd accomplished because he kept to this one philosophy. And I have a Bible on my desk, and in it is a letter my dad wrote to me when I was 30 years old. I was a middle manager at Intel, and I was having a really difficult time with my manager. And what my dad said in the letter, and I pulled it back out after his death, it said, look beyond what's currently in your life. Try to visualize what's unseen, count your blessings, and that's going to help you challenge the crisis you're experiencing. And then he would remind me in the letter that some of his greatest stumbling blocks have actually resulted in being his greatest stepping stones. And what I know from that experience of having that opportunity to watch this humble and gracious man stand on stage and see how he changed the world through his actions. Thousands of graduates who are in business, on TV, as anchors on different TV shows, owners of sports teams. All of these people that his value-based leadership brought forward. So that's why I actually accepted the offer to come and speak with you all today. I believe in what you're doing. I know there's an opportunity for all of us to work together. And I just hope that working with you and working with other faith-based organizations that I've been meeting with over the last few months, that we have a chance to do what my dad's talking about. We may never have the opportunity he had to see the results of our actions, but I have true belief that they will occur. So thanks for having me. Okay.
Ambassador Gable, thank you for energizing and inspiring us. Those were some of the steps that you mentioned, and indeed, I think we all feel energized and inspired from your remarks. We have a few minutes for Q&A, and I have to say this is a dream for me, to be able to be in an organization with people that I love and a mission that I love with a woman who's clearly a leader in helping us all be better. So I am enjoying these next few minutes, and I look forward to the questions that have already started coming in from those of you online and from some of you here in the audience. The first question might be related to that letter from your dad, and it's a rough one. And so I'm going to take us, if we can, with this question from the broader leadership level to a very tactical thing that you're expert in, and that's mentorship.
Yep.
Your book talks about it, your website has resources, you've spoken on it dozens of times. But the question, and I'll read here because I think it's quite poignant. Mentorship isn't always an easy marriage. Sometimes as a mentee, I disagree with the advice of my mentor. When do you know it's time to move on or quit, or should I? Lisa, what would you tell people?
Get some additional mentors. But secondarily, before you do that, I think it helps to step back and look at the world from their perspective. I had an opportunity to talk to Erin and Sherry this morning about something, and Sherry asked me a question, which is if I could tell myself, my younger self, something today, what would I tell them? And what I realized, it wasn't necessarily what I'd tell them, but what I recognized now in my late 50s is that at times of crisis, as with this letter, that I can remember what my mentors told me. So during COVID, it was very difficult to manage people, right? People were having a lot of anxiety. Everything was disrupted. And it was interesting, before I'd make really hard decisions, my mind would go back to a situation where I had a boss tell me something that I didn't necessarily agree with. But then what I realized 30 years later is the context in which they were giving me that recommendation. And that's the thing, is that until you're actually a parent, it's really difficult to understand why your parents told you those things that annoyed the living daylights out of you. If my mother said, well, that's life, one more time when I tell her that something was rough, it would drive me crazy. But as a parent, looking back in retrospect, or as a manager, looking back and recognizing their point of view. And I think in all situations, whether it's your mentor or if it's somebody that you don't agree with, you have to understand their point of view. You have to take a moment to separate yourself from who you are and instead look within the context in which they're operating. One thing you always have to understand, and this was always the hardest part during COVID, is that businesses are having to do things within the framework of human resource law. It's not always easy. We can't always tell you why we're making decisions that we are, but hopefully you have enough trust in your relationship with your mentor that you can at least give them the benefit of the doubt that they may know stuff you don't know, and their advice to you to hold on is take a moment, hold on for a period of time, and then if the world doesn't change the way that you want to, it's okay to leave. I always told my people, you know what, if you do a good job, I'll write your letter of recommendation. Just give me the courtesy of letting me know you're going. I'll even help you find a new job, and I've done that on many occasions. So I think that's the response.
Now, you mentioned and quoted President John F. Kennedy in this moment of a crisis of confidence in America. You've had to be the representative of the United States of America to people who were skeptical and in moments that were delicate. Media also could be seen as in a crisis of confidence, and we're a company of media companies and media brands. Trust for digital companies is low. Trust for media in general is tricky at best. How would you advise a group like DMC and the DMC family of companies who are deep in the media business and the media tradecraft to confront this crisis of confidence among our readers, politicians, or stakeholders?
Well, first and foremost, and this was another thing I got from my father, is he would always have a phrase, you have no margin for error. And what he was saying is that you really can't make mistakes. And that is the challenge. You have to keep yourself in the purest path forward. And you don't have a margin for error because, unfortunately, for those of us who are more on the values-based or more conservative side of the house, we make one mistake and we get nailed for it. And we get upset because we go, well, the other side's not getting treated that way, so it's not fair. But the thing was, I grew up as the daughter of a Baptist president of a university. Everybody knew what I did. And my sister didn't get the message, if she's listening. She forgot that no margin for error. But being the younger child, I kind of got it pretty quickly. I saw what happened to her. But you have to stay on the highest road possible. You really do need to make every decision with Washington's sniff test in mind, which is, if I make that's one reason I ate the tuna fish sandwiches. Jim and I paid to go to Japan. We flew our family over on frequent flyer points. That's how we did it. We paid for our daughter's education in Japan. My husband had cancer at the time. He weighed 96 pounds. That man refused to use my official car. It would take him forever to get across the park as a result because he had to park in long-term parking. And we all tried to persuade him that no one would mind. But I think that's part of the challenge. So no margin for error. You always have to stay at an operational level that's so above and beyond from an ethics and credibility standpoint. But secondarily is speaking to your audience and knowing who your audience is. I had an opportunity to be with your magazine folks last night, and we talked a lot about the 15 million people that visit the site every month. And I asked the question, have you thought about changing the name to have a broader appeal? And they said no, because we've done our research, and what we found is that the people who read us, they're consistent. They're with us all the time. And I think that new shiny penny problem sometimes we have is we start chasing after other audiences. And the reality is we forget about our people that have been with us all the time. And maybe we can just make that table bigger. Maybe that's our job, is make the table bigger that we're at, as opposed to trying to go sitting at other people's tables.
Going back to that data point that you made with us, make sure that you've got the data and that you know what's happening in your business. Matthew Sadowski from Bonneville International poses a question. He says, and thank you, Matthew, for joining us today. Ambassador Gable, you said that we shouldn't treat every step like a battle. Great advice, but how do you really know which battles to pick?
Ranking and rating. I mean, you really have to make a decision to focus on job number one. It was one thing I learned at Intel Corporation. Job number one, Intel, all the semiconductor industry within the United States had lost market share to the Japanese. And so we were at the same point we're at today, actually, 30 years before. And so the decision was made in the company, everything is about job one. Job one is reclaiming market share in the United States. And Intel only focused on job one. That's all they did. And nothing else mattered. And so they ranked and rated every single decision based on what is the most important thing. As a result of that, during my time period at Intel, which was only 5 years, they went from a deficit to owning 85% of the semiconductor marketplace in the world. And so focusing on the thing you must do to survive and thrive and let the other stuff go.
We're going to take 2 more questions, both here in our studio audience. Ginny is, I believe, here. Ginny, where are you? We have a question from Ginny. Would you pose it to the ambassador?
It sounds like you've had a lot of amazing experiences with people for advocating for yourself. Do you have any advice for advocating for others?
I do, which is do it all the time. It's much better and easier to brag about somebody else. And think about people who are not only currently at that next step up phase, but look down deeper into those people that need that chance, need that credential, need that opportunity, need the chance to do something in order for them to start moving up the ladder. I think one of the most powerful things we can do in the area of diversity and inclusion is linking arms with another person and helping that peer up the ladder and doing it very intentionally. And I think that's important to all of us, is to be highly intentional about how you do it. But it's so much fun. I love going on people's social media sites and saying nice things about them. I love writing letters of recommendation. That's my favorite thing to do. Everybody who knows me is like, oh, okay, I'll ask Lisa to write a letter of recommendation, and then I'm going to have to tone it down a little bit before we send it in. But I think that there are things you can do from an intentional standpoint that help you advocate for others, but you have to be very intentional about it.
We'll pose one question, and then I'm going to ask our colleague Sherry Dew to pose a final comment or some thoughts. It's not lost on anyone that we're here with a woman who's recognized for leadership in women's leadership. It's March. It is the month of International Women's Day and International Women's Activities and International Women's History. The question is, as a mentor of many, what advice would you give the women or those men who support and are part of a professional environment like this one, who are part of a professional community wanting to do more and better?
Make your table bigger. That's how I started the year with the post about making your table bigger. And where it came from is when my daughter was 13 years old, the lunchroom table had the cool girls at it. And they went and they complained to their principal, and the principal said, make your table bigger. And they did. They went and found other people to join them, so their army was bigger than the cool girls table. And that's my advice to anybody. Look, I'm of the generation, and we were talking about this earlier, and I have an article coming out on Monday about this, which is I wasn't invited to the table, right? You all saw that picture. I show that picture because it's so ludicrous, and I looked ridiculous. I mean, I didn't physically fit in. But what I did is I networked, and I just started my own networks. When I didn't make the cheerleading squad in high school, I started a different cheerleading squad, and we won the national competition. If somebody doesn't invite me to do something, I go and start something on my own. And that's what I would encourage you to do. Never let people hold the ground as if they were the cool girls that owned it. If they don't invite you to do something, just go and do something else. And then you're going to go gather everybody else in the same way that Rudolph did, the Island of Misfit Toys. You're all going to come together and change the world together, because you're going to recognize that people who don't always get invited the first time, some of those people are the best people. They're the most committed people, and they have talents that other people haven't recognized because they look different or they sound different. But your table will be filled with the most talented, because that's what you're looking for.
Thank you. Some final observations and the final question to Sherry Dew.
Ambassador Gable, thank you so much. Thank you for letting us learn from your experiences. I hope everybody is noticing how she communicates, because you communicate visually. So you allow us to picture what you're, not only the pictures that you showed us, but to picture what you're experiencing, and then we can relate it to ourselves. So here's my question to conclude. This is a company of communicators. We employ about 3,000 individuals in our media businesses. We reach somewhere north of 120 million unique readers a year, or listeners, or because we've got broadcast, we have print, we have everything. When you think about the challenges we have in the country today, a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration, some contention. There seems to be a feeling that, yeah, it's okay to lash out at whoever seems to look at the world differently. Thinking about all these communicators you're talking to, what do you wish we could do or would do to make the situation in the country better today?
Going back to her question, which is advocating on behalf of others, applaud them publicly. Applaud people who don't like you publicly for the good thing that they did. Continuous positive reinforcement, as Ronald Reagan demonstrated over and over and over again, is really the only way to maintain the high road. And I truly do believe if you take a moment to feature all the good things that are happening, the diversity of talent that's out there, the times where my 60-40 rule comes in, which is that you find people you agree with 60% of the time, and you amplify that 60%, and you just make sure to ignore the 40% you don't necessarily agree with. But by continuously staying on the high road, focusing on the good things, showing people there's a path forward, I think that's what people are looking for right now. They just want to know there's a path forward. And when we keep saying, I don't and I can't, then people throw up their hands and they wonder, well, why try? Why try when we make things such a big institutional or aspirational goal, and the Congress tells you that, we can't do it? Why should you bother to try? But if people keep showing you what people do, what they can accomplish, that's when you know you can do it too.
Ambassador Gable, everyone in the Deseret Management Corporation family believes in our mission, and it requires this kind of leadership, this kind of turnaround, this kind of commitment to what it means to be a mentor and a leader and an innovator. We thank you for being here. We thank everyone who has joined us here in the studio, at Studio A, online, and people who are just trying to be better at what we do because the mission matters. And we feel honored that you were here to help us learn and connect. Help me in thanking Ambassador Lisa Gable.
Thank you.